Welcome all. Thanks so much for joining the fifth and final webinar in our Jumpstart Your Farm with USDA series. So I've got just a few housekeeping items as we're getting started. Today's session and all of our previous sessions are recorded and will be posted on the New Hampshire page. I'll drop a link to that in the chat as we get rolling. In the audience, your microphone and video are disabled, but we're able to turn them on if needed, so no worries there. Just use the chat to interact with us for now and raise your hand if needed. So feel free to drop any questions or comments in the chat and we'll work through addressing those throughout the presentation. We have 3 presenters today, so we'll take some pauses between each presenter for any applicable questions. And then of course we can cover questions at the end as well. So please don't be shy. We'd love to hear from you. I brought along 3 coworkers today to help share NRCS program information. And between all 3 presenters, there's over 57 years of experience with NRCS. So I think that means I'm going to turn you over to very good hands. They're very capable. So with that, we're going to move into our introductions. So each of our presenters is going to go ahead and say hello and who they are.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Actually, good afternoon for you guys. I'm Stephanie Tidwell. I am the Financial Assistance Program Manager for the state, and I am covering EQIP, CSP, and AMA.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. I'm Helen Castles. I'm a program analyst with the easements team, and we'll be talking to you about both our agricultural land easements and our wetland reserve easements.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brooke Stubbs. I'm an easement specialist with the New Hampshire NRCS. I've got primary responsibility for the wetland reserve easements, closing those easements, and specifically U.S. held NRCS conservation easements. So welcome.
Hello, I'm Tabitha Edwards. I'm the State Outreach Coordinator here for New Hampshire Natural Resources Conservation Service. I'm so happy to have you here to learn a bit more about our programs today. We are going to cover an agency overview and field office programs, and we're also going to cover easements, which include ag land easements and wetland easements. And as I said, we'll have time for questions as well, so please drop your questions in the chat. And now I'm going to hand it over to Stephanie to kick us off.
Great, thanks, Tabitha. So again, thank you all for joining us. We're happy to be here and hopefully give you guys some new information maybe that you have not received yet that'll help you get started and get involved with the agency. So who are we? Who is NRCS? We are the Natural Resource Conservation Service, and we are voluntary on your behalf. We're non-regulatory. We're locally led through various different avenues. We pull in information with some of our partners and other working groups to help determine a lot of our goals and kind of pinpoint how we're going to focus each year based on that locally led data and those meetings. We're a federal conservation agency, and we provide free technical assistance on anything, and we also are able to provide financial assistance on some things with people. We have partnerships and offices in every state, in most every county, not every county, but most every county across the country. So there are opportunities with our programs from ag and forestry, cropland, pasture land, all types, sizes, locations, everything. We focus heavily on privately owned lands, and there are no, like we say, there's no size limitations, no acreage limitations, none of those things. Next slide, please. So conservation planning and implementation, what is that? So we are able to help you develop a conservation plan that is tailored specifically to your land, specifically to your operation, whether that be farmland, forest land, what have you. We want to know what your goals are, what your objectives are, long-term and short-term, so that we can identify the problems, the opportunities for improvement, determine where we're going. And as we're doing those things, we're looking at the land and inventorying the resources there. You'll hear, if you work with us in the future, you'll hear a lot at the field office level about resource concerns. And so we inventory those resources and we determine how are these things that are happening on the land affecting the soil, the water, the air, the plants, the health, all of those things. And we analyze that and come up with our alternatives for you and kind of go through them, give you a chance to think about them, look over them, determine which direction you're going to go. And then we allow you to make the decision of what you would like to move forward on and where you would like to focus. Do you want to just take a few of your short-term goals? Do you want a full-blown, what we would refer to as a resource RMS level plan? So, and then we help you implement that plan either through our free conservation technical assistance or potentially through our programs that I'm going to tell you about. And as we move through that, we like to pause and go and move backwards and evaluate that plan as we're moving through. Next slide, please. So I mentioned our financial assistance, right? So we can develop those conservation plans with anyone without any agreement, no money involved, any of the things. That falls under our conservation technical assistance, and it's free. It's a free service to everyone. But then we have our kind of what we refer to as our main or our big financial assistance program. So EQIP being one of them. It's the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, and it offers the financial and technical assistance, again, cropland, pasture land, forest land, all those things to address those resource concerns I named a few minutes ago: soil, water, air, plants, animals, energy. And so this year in New Hampshire, we have approximately $3 million remaining in funds that need to be expended. We do currently have an open funding announcement. We do take applications all year round, no matter what. But right now, it just happens this year, we have about $3 million remaining, and we have some open funding opportunities where we are looking to take on additional applications. And specifically this year, the priorities that remain where the funds are that can be addressed are for some of our livestock producers and some of our socially disadvantaged individuals. Next slide, please. So then we have our Agricultural Management Assistance Program, or AMA. And so AMA helps ag producers manage the risks by implementing specific conservation practices. And this program is only available in a select number of states where there has been historically low participation in crop insurance programs. So it's a little bit of a buffer kind of to help them. And right now this year we have about $195,000 remaining. And in New Hampshire, our targets for that program, in order to meet some of those program policies and the parameters in which we must operate, we are targeting high tunnel installation and then irrigation practices that can be implemented in that high tunnel situation. So you'll see there on the list, we have high tunnel, irrigation pipeline, reservoir, micro irrigation, sprinkler systems, mulching, irrigation water management, pumps, roof runoffs, and water wells. So if there's anything that you have that may need addressing through one of those practices, there also is an open funding announcement for that available right now. Next slide, please. So then we move into our third and final financial assistance program, and that's the Conservation Stewardship Program, otherwise known as CSP. And so CSP is different in terms of EQIP. So in EQIP, I referenced addressing some of those resource concerns, right? And so what you would do is we would go through that conservation plan that I discussed and determine what resource concerns we're going to address and pick a practice or two or three and address them. And once that practice is complete, you're finished, everything's good, you receive your reimbursement on your cost share for installing that practice, and you're done, right? You've held up your end of the bargain and the contract is completed. With CSP, it operates a little bit differently. We're still going to write that conservation plan. We're still going to evaluate those natural resources, but we're going to use the evaluation of those resources to determine what your it's referred to as stewardship threshold is. So basically, the way I like to explain it is, we evaluate the data to get a baseline, read your baseline, and then see where it is and utilize those natural resources and those enhancement activities to increase your level of conservation over a 5-year period. So this program is a 5-year program. The payments also run differently than EQIP, whereas you are not paid immediately upon completion. You are paid annually during the fall of the year. And this year, there was an increase in our minimum payment. And so you will not receive less than $4,000 per year on a CSP contract. So if for whatever reason maybe you have a small veggie operation, it's only a couple of acres, it doesn't, the payment doesn't come out, it only comes out to $3,000. Well, that minimum payment is going to take effect and you're automatically going to be bumped up to receive no less than $4,000 a year annually. And so those payments are made up of a couple of different things. So it's going to come through as one payment, but again, it's a little bit different than EQIP because it's going to be comprised of 3 different things. So it's the number of acres in your operation. There's a set payment rate per land use type. So whether it's pasture land, farmstead, associated ag land, cropland. So there's a payment rate for that is set and predetermined. And then there are payment rates for the enhancement activities or practices that you choose to implement. And then there's a payment rate for that threshold. So we evaluated that threshold, and based on what that evaluation is, there's a payment that goes with it. And all of those things are put together for combined, and you receive one annual payment that again will be no less than $4,000 per year. So this year we have about $1 million remaining in an open funding announcement. And some of the priorities there, one of the priorities there that we're looking for is to address and to help some of our organic producers. Next slide, please. All right, so we're going to get into some of our definitions. So a few minutes ago, I mentioned that one of the funding targets for EQIP this year that remains was socially disadvantaged individuals. So I'm going to kind of go through some of those categories and those definitions and let you know what they are. So first we have our veteran farmer or rancher. And so per NRCS and FSA, the criteria for that is an individual who has served in the armed forces and was released for service, and they qualify as a beginning farmer or rancher, or they first obtained their veteran status during the last 10 years. So either they meet our definition for a beginning farmer or they were discharged within the most recent 10 years. And so all of these categories that I'm going to define and describe for you allow an individual to receive a higher payment rate than someone who does not meet these definitions. Next slide, please. So what is a beginning farmer? Who is a beginning farmer? So that's an individual who has not operated a farm or ranch for more than 10 consecutive years. So you're going to want to look back at the most recent 10 years. And a good way to kind of determine that is on your income taxes, like filing that Schedule F on your income taxes would kind of give you that definition. If you've not had that for 10 consecutive years, then you would qualify. And all of these categories and definitions are also self-certification. So you are the one who determines if you meet that definition. We are not going to tell you, I'm sorry, you don't qualify. So that's something that each individual has to determine for themselves. Next slide, please. So socially disadvantaged and or historically underserved. You'll hear us a lot utilize those terms interchangeably. So for the socially disadvantaged and historically underserved, those are going to be groups of of individuals who are historically targeted or subjected to racial or ethnic prejudices, right? So American Indian, Alaskan Native, Asian, Black, African American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, or Hispanic. So if you identify as any of those groups, then that would qualify you for socially disadvantaged and that increased payment. And also some of our historically underserved categories also for EQIP will allow you the ability to be eligible for an advanced payment. So potentially if you needed additional help up front funding the installation of a conservation activity, if you meet the historically underserved definition, then we are able to provide you an advanced payment of up to half of those funds to be dispersed in order for you to get started on the activity and then follow up with the remaining payment upon completion. Next slide, please. All right, so limited resource for farmer ranchers. So this one there is a self-determination tool, and I believe, I'm not very QR code savvy, but I believe that if you scan that QR code there, it will take you directly to that tool where you can go through the questions and determine if you're eligible for to meet this definition. So it's someone who has direct or indirect gross farm sales from the most previous 2 years that fall under $226,300 and the less than 50% of the county median household income for the previous 2 years. So those definitions, that one's very case by case basis because it depends upon the size of your household, the county within you reside, your gross farm sales, all of those things. So the best bet for using determining this category is to use that tool. So like I said, there's the QR code there and also the link there. And I will say I did just misspeak that the 226,000 is specifically for Rockingham County. So that is not just a blanket number. It is very dependent upon your situation and where you reside. Next slide, please. So quickly on the tax implications. So whenever you receive a payment from NRCS for participation in our financial assistance programs, you will receive a 1099 for that year that has to go to be filed with your income taxes. So any of our financial assistance programs, such as, and that's the Farm Service Agency as well as NRCS. So anything such as CRP, the Conservation Reserve Program, EQIP, CSP, AMA, any crop disaster payments, the Market Facilitation Program, all of those, if you receive a payment, you will receive that 1099. And additionally, the Form 1098 is issued for farm loans if you're classified as an individual and the farm ownership or operating loan is secured by real estate. So I want to just reiterate, like we don't deal with the tax implications outside of that. We do know that you will receive a 1099, but other than that, there is a taxes for farmers and ranchers website. I'm sorry, I lost my words there for a minute. Or the best recommendation I always make to people is contact your tax advisor. They are always going to be the best bet for this, but you can receive our technical assistance for free. We can write that conservation plan for free. The only time the tax implications come into play is if and when you do receive money from the government. So I believe that wraps up my slides, Tabitha. Maybe have one more. Oh, no, I do
Yeah.
have one more. I'm sorry. I got ahead of myself.
Oh, it's okay.
Yeah, so the Inflation Reduction Act. So I'm sure everyone has heard of the Inflation Reduction Act. We refer to it as IRA or IRA. The targets for it are climate smart funding, and it is just additional funds that have been added to our existing programs. So they took our existing programs, EQIP, CSP, AMA, that are written into every farm bill, and they passed this act for additional funding that will be worked into those existing policies and programs. So starting last year and running through fiscal year 2026, there was $19.5 billion projected nationwide. So you heard me say on each slide, we have 1 million remaining in CSP, and we have 2 million remaining in this program. So a lot of those remaining funds we have remaining this year because they are IRA related. We did receive additional funding under this act, and so it has allowed us to help a lot more, write a lot more plans, get a lot more of our financial assistance out there. And the estimated project funding from 2023 to 2026. So 14 million in ASAP easement programs, 12 million in EQIP, and 5 million in CSP. And so those were just estimates that were given to us at the beginning of this project last year. And those numbers have actually already changed. We actually received more funding this year than what was projected, and likely will next year as well. And so with the Inflation Reduction Act, our funds will increase through 2026, and then we will not receive any more of those fundings, and we will have until 2031 to carry out the expenditure of those funds in those related contracts. Next slide, please. So this is our list of the IRA, or as we refer to CSAF, the Climate Smart Ag and Forestry activities. So with the Inflation Reduction Act came the specific policy that in order to tie anything to those funds, we have to be targeting climate friendly, climate smart mitigation activities, right? So how do we do that? So they had a whole team of individuals who evaluated all of our conservation practice standards and have spent the last couple of years determining which ones actually have a mitigation value for climate and climate related activities. And so that's what this list is. So in order to benefit from some of that funding and receive an IRA contract, you would need to have one of these core, what we refer to as core practices, in your contract. And then, of course, anything that may potentially be related to that as supporting or facilitating to help you carry that activity out that is not a core practice could also be included. And there is a QR code, a couple of QR codes and some links there on the side for the full document and additional information that we have on mitigation categories, specific conservation practices, and some of those IRA related documents. Next slide. So what do I mean when I say mitigation categories? So they kind of broke it down into different categories of how we could reduce different emissions, capturing carbon, those sorts of things. So they categorized it and affinitized that data into soil health, nitrogen management, livestock partnership, grazing and pasture, agroforestry, forestry and wildlife, energy, combustion and electricity efficiency, and wetlands. And again, we have the QR code there on the side for additional information. Next slide, please. So just kind of an overview of what we quickly discussed. So you contact FSA, contact NRCS. Are you already registered and you've already made contact with NRCS? This little flow chart here is just going to show you how to walk through the process, how to set up your records with FSA, how to contact NRCS, how to schedule a site visit to determine that conservation plan, to evaluate those resources, so on and so forth, all the way through the process that I just described for you. Next slide, please. All right, so our timeline. As I said before, our applications are accepted all year round. But right now we do have those open funding announcements. And for EQIP CSP round 2, that application deadline is going to be April the 12th. So we will always take the application, but after April the 12th, it will not be considered for funding in round 2. And outside of that, at this time, we are not certain if we will have a third round announcement, because we would have to then evaluate the funds that are available and see where we go from there. So if there is a round 3, it would be announced at a later time with a date after April the 12th. So for this round of funding, our obligation goal is May the 17th. And we have, so also we have EQIP Act Now. And so that is, Act Now is just an accelerated way for us to implement our contracting phase. So things that require minimal engineering design, things that you are just immediately ready to pull the trigger on: cover crops, residue and tillage management, no-till, energy efficiency improvement practices. We have some oyster restoration practices, different like forestry management plans, other types of management plans. Those things that you're just ready to pull the trigger on immediately, that will take little to no planning. We can expedite basically that quote paperwork process and get your contract obligated much faster than our normal cycle time. Next slide, please. All right, so working with the Farm Service Agency, we are partnered with the Farm Service Agency. They are our record holders. So you would have to, in order to participate in any of our financial assistance programs, you would need to first establish your farm records with them. In order to do that, you need a proof of identity, a copy of your recorded deed, the survey plat, rental lease agreement, anything like that that identifies. Basically, you have to identify yourself and identify the property that you are wishing to establish the records on. They need to be able to identify the boundary lines. If you are not the owner, we'll need to get some of that information as well from the landowner. But you do not have to own the property to participate in our programs. And also there are, we have entities, corporations, estate, and trust documents. If you do have an entity, you would need to bring that documentation as well, so they could set that up appropriately in the system. Next slide, please. All right, so that brings me to what I really think is my last slide this time. And so here is a map of New Hampshire with all of our field offices and our contact information there. And down the left-hand side, you can see the Farm Service Agency offices that are co-located in Concord, Lancaster, Orford, Epping, and Walpole, with their telephone number and extension. So again, you just find your local service center that services the county in which you live, reach out to them, and we will work together with FSA to help you get everything established, get you the information that you need to participate in any of these programs. That is all I have.
Thanks so much, Stephanie.
Yes, thanks, Tabitha. Does anyone have any questions?
I don't see any questions in the chat, but if anyone has one real quick, they could raise their hand. I don't see any questions, then we can move into our easement section. Thanks so much, Stephanie.
All right, so for the next half of our hour today, we're going to be talking about conservation easements. And NRCS provides an agricultural conservation easement program that helps landowners, land trusts, and other entities protect and restore wetlands, grasslands, and farms and forest lands throughout the state. This is a program with a number of details, so we wanted to draw your attention to the QR code on the right there. It will give you a lot more information about our programs. It takes you directly to our website, and there are a lot of helpful informational materials there. All right, next slide, please. All right, land conservation easements, also commonly referred to as conservation restrictions in some parts of the state. They are very similar documents. In New Hampshire, as we're experiencing increased development pressure, there's more interest in land conservation easements. In addition, you probably heard in Stephanie's discussion about the IRA funds, Inflation Reduction Act funds. There's an additional $14 million available for land conservation throughout the state. So we're very interested in continuing the land conservation with those funds in the state. Farmers and landowners are confronting growing challenges, including permanent land conversion due to development, and climate change. Extreme weather events are also causing extra stresses and pressures for our cropland. But preserving land under an easement, we secure our resources for generations to come. Next slide, please. Okay, as Stephanie has mentioned, our programs are funded through the Farm Bill programs and also through the Inflation Reduction Act funds. Our most common easement programs in New Hampshire are the Agricultural Land Easement Program, also called ALE, the Wetland Reserve Easement Program, commonly referred to as WRE, and also we have a fairly new up-and-coming program called the Regional Conservationist Program, called RCPP. These programs are approved by Congress, and they're our most popular programs. Today, we'll be talking about mainly just the Agricultural Land Easement Program, and Brooke will be talking about the Wetland Reserve Easement Program. Next slide, please. Okay, so the goal of conservation easements is to preserve, restore, protect, and enhance conservation values of the land forever. And the question there is, how do we do that? How do we achieve that forever? Next slide, please. And we do that through a conservation easement. What is an easement? It is a document that's recorded with the deed. And essentially, we commonly refer to every parcel as a bundle of sticks. It has a bundle of land rights available in that particular parcel of land. You have the right to farm. You have the right to exclude others, to enjoy the land, to mine, to forest, to hunt and fish. These are all rights that come with a parcel of land. In addition, you also have the right to subdivide and to develop the land. So when the agency purchases a conservation easement, essentially we're taking a couple of sticks out of the bundle. We're purchasing, for example, the right to develop for agricultural land easements. We want that land to stay in open fields and forestry and agriculture. So we're going to pull off one of those sticks, purchase one of those sticks as a land right with this conservation easement. And in perpetuity, if that easement is secured, then it can no longer be developed, and it remains in open space for agriculture, for wetlands, whatever the purpose of the conservation easement is. So how is it maintained forever? There's an easement holder, and the easement holder is in charge of monitoring, maintaining the conservation easement, and ensuring that that land is maintained for its intended purposes. and will enforce if there is an issue with development or some issue with that. So the conservation, the easement holder is a critical piece moving forward with this program. That's a very broad brush stroke of what a conservation easement. There are many, many details, but that gives it to you in a kind of a nutshell what the program is. Next slide, please. Okay, as mentioned, we have our most popular programs in New Hampshire are the Agricultural Land Easement, ALE, and the Wetland Reserve Easement, WRE. With ALE, NRCS provides funds through an eligible entity or a land trust. So we work in partnership with a land trust, a local land trust, or another entity that will eventually hold the conservation easement on the property. So we'll work in concert with another land trust to secure the easement. And once the eligible entity or the land trust secures the easement, they are responsible for monitoring, managing, and enforcing that easement in perpetuity. Just quickly to go over a broad brushstroke on wetland reserve easements. NRCS purchases the easement directly from private landowners. NRCS or the US will hold the easement, and NRCS is responsible for monitoring, management, and enforcement of that easement. Next slide, please. Okay, so to the nitty-gritty, and the purpose of ALE is they're designed to be working agricultural easements. We're very interested in protecting and ensuring that the land is maintained in agriculture for future generations. It's designed to protect agricultural uses and future viability by limiting the non-agricultural uses. NRCS can pay up to 50% of the fair market value of the easement. So if you are selected and enrolled in the program, an appraisal would be ordered to determine the fair market value of the easement land, and NRCS would pay 50% of that. The other 50% needs to be paid by the land trust or the entity or through landowner donation. Next slide. Okay, so the ALE program, to be eligible for the ALE program, you have to have kind of three categories to kind of come together to make the full eligibility. It's the entity eligibility or the land trust eligibility. The land itself, is it eligible? And is the landowner also eligible? In the next few slides, I'll be kind of talking about these three categories, but they're three basic categories that we need to meet to make sure that you're eligible for the program. Next slide. Okay, as discussed, we work in partnership with land trusts and entities to secure an agricultural land easement on the property. So how do you go about finding a land trust as a partner? The New Hampshire Land Trust Coalition has a very handy map. I've included a link here. It's an interactive map. You can click all over the state, find out where you live, and also understand what land trusts are operating and protecting land in your area. I recommend this map for getting a list of names of entities or land trusts that might protect land and work in partnership for this program. Also, the American Farmland Trust has a great website designed for landowners and land trusts for more information and more details on how to work through find a partner and work through the program. Next slide. Okay, so we've covered the entity eligibility, now the land eligibility. It must be privately owned agricultural land, and there needs to be either cropland, pasture land, and no more than 66% private forest land. It needs to be under some sort of development pressure to rank high in our selection program. It is a competitive process. We assess and rank all parcels based on the most valuable ag lands protected and the development pressures that they are under. Also, the land must be 50% prime or farmland statewide soils. There are some other categories that you need to qualify. You can qualify for. It can be either further local important soils, or they may have historical or archaeological resource values, or protect certain grazing uses. So all of those land types are eligible for the AL program. Next slide. Okay, ineligible lands. This is handy to kind of compare and contrast as I discuss what's eligible. Land owned by the US, by state units of government, local units of government are all not eligible. This is established at the congressional level, and we don't have flexibility. It must be privately owned land. Lands that are already under some sort of similar easement or deed restriction are not eligible. Have some sort of on-site or off-site conditions that are adverse, hazardous materials, that sort of thing, makes it ineligible. Unacceptable exceptions on title, or if insufficient clear access to a property, or if there's some other rights that are owned by oil or gas companies, all are ineligible lands. Next slide. Okay. Landowner eligibility, and Stephanie has mentioned this. You work with your farm service agency to develop farm records, and that includes an adjusted gross income form, some farm operating information, highly erodible land determination, and if it's a member, or there are members of the organization, you need to establish their records as well. So you work with the Farm Service Agency to establish landowner eligibility. Next slide. Okay, so just a broad brushstroke overview of the ALE process. And this kind of takes place over the course of a year, or a little less than a year, that's our fiscal year, to enroll a potential property. So the land trust would submit an application with the landowner. NRCS would determine its eligibility, rank it, select it. If you're successful in funding, then we would enter into a program agreement with agreed to items. The entity or the land trust would develop the appraisal and a draft survey, boundary survey, and work on the easement language. That would all go through an NRCS and national state review process. And then you're free to close and receive payment from NRCS. Next slide. Okay, that takes me to the end of my portion of the ALE program, but I wanted to alert you again to the QR code for lots of information. There are a lot of fact sheets and details on our NRCS website that would be very helpful. And again, the American Farmland Trust has a great website to assist landowners with this process. Are there any questions about the agricultural land easement program?
Thanks so much, Helen. I don't see any questions in the chat at this time, but the attendees can feel free to drop questions or comments in the chat as we go. And we'll hand it over to our last speaker of the day, and that'll be Brooke.
All right, thank you, Tabitha. So next slide, please. So the wetland reserve easement component to the agricultural conservation easement program. The program purpose and objectives are listed here. The purpose being to restore lost wetlands and wetland ecosystem values due to either current or past agricultural uses. So the land doesn't have to be under active agricultural use to be eligible. to be in pasture or cropland now. It can be forest land. And that wetland degradation can have occurred at any point in the property's land use history. It could be forested with those long-lasting effects from the past agricultural uses, from agricultural abandonment that happened 150 years ago. Those can still be considered. So you might be asking, how can a wetland reserve easement, jumpstart your farm business? Well, maybe you have areas that are marginal cropland that aren't as productive as you'd like, and you could take those areas out of production and be compensated for doing that. And then those funds could be reinvested, elsewhere, maybe even bring other more suitable areas into agricultural production. So I'm thinking about waterfront areas, susceptible to storm damage, or even, saltwater inundation, fields and floodplains that are prone to bank erosion, where you can get that compensation before, the land is a total loss. Also, the wetland reserve easement area, it doesn't have to be the entire parcel, so it can be configured to protect, wetlands and then provide a buffer to those wetlands. The vision for the ASEP program, the agricultural land easement and the wetland reserve easement, is that you can have both of those easement types on a single ownership or parcel of land. So next slide, please. So this is a list of main ingredients that make up a good WRE project. If you're interested in the program, an NRCS staff member will ask you for a copy of your deed. We have to verify ownership length for the program. It has a 2-year ownership history requirement. And then we also just need to verify who has, title to the land. And with, WRE, because we're acquiring management rights, we need to have the legal and physical access, and that's part of land eligibility. The program's trying to build wildlife corridors, so having direct connections to other conservation lands is definitely a priority. And again, protecting land for threatened and endangered species. At least 50% of the land would be eligible wetlands and/or the eligible riparian buffers. And again, if for every 1 acre of eligible land, whether it's a degraded wetland or a riparian buffer, a wetland buffer area, we can add an acre of adjacent upland. So oftentimes we're able to protect a whole parcel of land, or if we need to exceed that and protect more uplands, we can get a waiver for that based on species. And the last and most important ingredient is that the landowner objectives really align with the program objectives to create wildlife reserves in perpetuity. Next slide, please. All right, so taking a closer look at what type of land is eligible. These are the primary eligibility categories we use in New Hampshire. Riparian areas are defined by the program as 300 feet on either side of a river, stream, channel, or water body. The riparian eligible buffers can link other directly abutting protected wetlands on either side. So it's that missing puzzle piece for protecting, the wildlife habitat corridors. Or we can consider directly linking eligible wetlands within the area being offered. That's another way we would consider riparian areas. The first scenario of directly linking protected wetlands outside the offered area, right, into abutting conservation lands, that's more of a limited scenario. But the catch for the second scenario of how we can link wetlands within an offered area, the catch is that those wetlands have to be otherwise eligible and be degraded, that can be restored. There's a couple of examples of maybe some riparian areas along a river channel. So up the bank and the 300 feet up the bank, and then again some degradation. There's some old skidder trails maybe that are used as recreational trails now that went through wetlands and created some impacts there. And then a channel that shows it's in size. It's not, engaging with the floodplain anymore. And, those are some restoration opportunities that we look for. Next slide, please. So how do we determine the value? So the program, because we have a boilerplate warranty easement deed, and you should see a little snippet of that deed. Because it's non-negotiable, we develop a market analysis, and an appraiser will come up with a list of comparable sales for a market area. We have market areas based on region in New Hampshire. So there's one for the seacoast, and one for the north country. So they'll develop that list of comparable sales and come up with an average value per acre. And that's how we do that for the lands typically enrolled. So lands typically enrolled are lands that are, raw and unencumbered land that supports residential development. So again, if there's land that doesn't meet that scenario of the market analysis, then we can get an appraisal for those reasons. If it's zoned as commercial industrial, or maybe it is not, residential development isn't the highest and best use. It might be that it is agriculture. It might be a floodplain field. So then we would get an appraisal to determine that value. Next slide, please. So this is just an overview of the timeline. So we would follow the similar timeline as the ale side, where we establish an application cutoff, typically in the fall, early winter, and then, progress through our fiscal year. And then once we have an agreement to purchase in place, it can be 18 to 24 months to close on these US held easements. There's just many steps in the process and reviews for these federal acquisitions. So we encourage applications on a continuous basis and a continuous selection, but we do have to establish the cutoffs just to make sure we're working within our federal fiscal year. And I guess I should mention that for the US held, NRCS is responsible for paying for the survey, mostly all of the costs for the acquisition. The only thing the landowner would have to come up with is anything that needs to be corrected so they can convey the easement. So maybe they have a mortgage, and a lot of mortgage holders require appraisal to determine value to make sure their interests are covered, and that kind of a cost comes from the landowner. Similar to how you would if you were refinancing a mortgage. And then of course, restoration. So once we acquire the easement, we are responsible for restoration, and we'll pay 100%. So what landowners get is, a partner in perpetuity to help, manage the land and improve its condition for wildlife. Next slide, please. And this is just another overview of the application process, where we may need to take multiple visits. We can do site visits before an application is even filed to help determine if it's a good fit or not. And then again, more visits probably after an application's filed, just to develop the land eligibility determinations, the restoration plan development, and the application ranking and all those. So it's common that we'll need to take multiple visits. And that, I believe, is my last slide. This is really just to get our new easement planner contact information out there. So if you are in any of these areas and are interested, to look at specific projects, please reach out to our easement planners. They can help with providing like a screening map to see if it's, is that going to be a good fit? And then just go from there and assisting with filing applications as well. So next slide, please.
Thank you, Brooke. So that finishes up our slide deck for the day. And here's our non-discrimination statement. We reviewed some of our historically underserved definitions and things, and that plays into some of our civil rights language. So sharing this slide as well. But I want to say a huge thanks to all of our presenters. And if anybody in the audience has any questions or comments, feel free to drop them in the chat. You can also raise your hand at this time, and I'm able to unmute you if you would like to talk to us. Got just a few more minutes until 1 o'clock, so we'll hang out for a little bit and see if any questions come up. And of course, if any questions come up after you drop off this call for the attendees, feel free to reach out to our local offices. And our contact info is at the beginning of the slides. If there's something specific for one of us, feel free to reach out. But you can call and visit our local offices as well. We have 8 offices around the whole state, so hopefully you can find one conveniently for you. You all did such a great job. There's just no questions. You answered all of the questions. All right, it's quiet out there. I think we can go ahead and conclude it. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your Thursday afternoon and have a lovely weekend. We're getting close to the weekend.
Thanks, Tabitha.
Thank you.
Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Yeah.